It's said to be the oldest profession in the world, and it's the cause of one of the longest-running debates in this state. Well, this morning a seminar was held at State Parliament as part of a campaign to decriminalise prostitution. The event was organised by local MP Stephanie Key, and it's the precursor to a reform bill she's about to put before the Parliament.
At the moment, sex workers don't have any rights or any protections, and under a decriminalised model, sex workers would have access to all of the rights and all of the protections that every other worker does in South Australia.
In the past 20 years, laws dealing with the sex industry have changed dramatically across the country. Prostitution is decriminalised in New South Wales and in the ACT with some restrictions. Brothels are licensed in Victoria and freely advertise their services and fees. And it's legal to work in a brothel in Queensland. But in South Australia, despite 7 failed attempts at law reform, the Act governing prostitution hasn't changed in more than half a century.
And they say that the law is negative because it strengthens the whore stigma. They feel hunted by the police.
This 2-hour sex industry seminar held in State Parliament this morning is another episode in the long history of politicians pushing to decriminalise prostitution in South Australia. It's the second seminar in 2 months organised by Labor MP Stephanie Key. She hopes to bring in a reform bill before Parliament breaks for Christmas.
Well, I think we need to get up with the modern times, and in particular the concern is that we make sure that workers in the industry are protected and do have the same rights as other workers.
As well as the parliamentary seminar, a public seminar was held at the library on Hutt Street in the city. Here the manager of the Sex Industry Network in South Australia told about her run-in with the law as an 18-year-old receptionist at a massage parlour.
Part of my job was taking the money from clients, and one day there was a really big bust. There was 20 cops, there was video cameras, the whole bit, and the client pointed to me for taking the money, and I now have a criminal conviction for receiving money in a brothel. So that criminal conviction has stayed with me for the rest of these years. 15 years later, I still have that conviction. I still have to explain that everywhere I go. When I've applied for other jobs, that's come up. It certainly stopped me from applying for jobs. It stopped me from studying certain things. For example, law. I wanted to do law. I can't do law anymore because I've got a criminal conviction. I wouldn't be able to practice as a lawyer.
The Sex Industry Network in South Australia says while politicians have been busy with their seminars, the police have been even busier raiding brothels, with 4 raids in the last 2 months.
What the sex workers say is that they feel as if there's no rhyme or reason for the inspections and the raids that go on. And in fact the raids are not very helpful at the moment. So I think some clarity with the legislation would be helpful to the police and everybody that has to provide security and support as well.
And there's also support from some surprising sectors in society.
The information that I've had is that in the aged care area, we just don't assume that everybody's okay. People still have sexual appetite that they would like to have satisfied. People in the disability area have also argued, probably more radical people in both of those areas, but have argued that they think there are benefits in there being the sex industry being a legal service and being recognised as something that a number of people want.
When I worked, the police would knock on the door and check to see I was living where I was living. And, as it happened, I was living with my mother. I was a school teacher as well. However, we have now progressive law which has stopped all of that kind of nonsense.
The keynote speaker at both the public and the parliamentary seminars is Catherine Healy, a woman who campaigned for and won a change to the law in New Zealand 7 years ago.
Well, it was interesting. I think a lot of people who opposed the change in law said that, aside from the sky falling in, that we would see more brothels and more sex workers and more organised crime. None of those things happened. What we have seen is that sex workers feel more able to contact the police, to report violence, to seek help if they're in difficulty.
Do you have any examples of how sex workers are now better off?
Well, we had a situation where a street worker was being stood over. She had traffic fines and the police officer was approaching her for sex, and he said, I can get rid of your fines if you just turn it up basically, and she said, well, I'm not going to do that, and reported him, and he was charged and convicted and sent to prison. That wouldn't have happened prior to the law. I don't think that sex worker would have felt able to go to the police, the very agency who was involved with criminalising sex workers prior to our change in law in 2003.
This former primary school teacher who worked for almost 10 years in the classroom is now an international campaigner for law reform. She recently returned from a number of speaking engagements, including one in the British House of Commons, and she says if the Parliament here does its homework properly, it will have no choice but to decriminalise prostitution.
We would urge your government to consider a change in law. If you're concerned about the vulnerability of people in the sex industry, you would and should change the law.
Well, no, look, I really don't think so. I mean, prostitution isn't the oldest profession in the world, it's the oldest oppression in the world.
Dennis Hood leads the Family First Party. It has 2 members in the Legislative Council, so it controls almost 10% of the vote there. And he says he's done the numbers and believes the bill will go close, but still fail.
So I don't accept that it's inevitable. I think if you have a good look at what really this offers our community, then people will, then members can and should vote against it. And I would say to people pushing for this bill to be made law, would they volunteer their daughter to be a prostitute? I've yet to have somebody who has come to me and say that they're happy to volunteer their daughter to be a prostitute.